The story of the fall of Spider-Man. In ancient times, the Spider-Man used to live in the Sky Country. He lived by himself in a cheerful small home, where he wove webs and long frail ladders that allowed star people to travel back and forth, from the sky to the earth. The star people frequently traveled to Earth at night, where they lived as light-filled fairies, and performed good actions for women and young children, and they regularly went back and forth on Spider-Man's ladder. The Spider-Man had a very difficult time, because he had to work very hard, spinning the yarn for his ladders, and weaving his webs all time. One day, when the Spider-Man had a short respite from his labors, he gazed down to the Earth Country, and there he saw many of the Earth people playing at sports, taking sweet sap from the maple trees, or harvesting berries on the rolling hills, but most of the men were idling, and doing nothing in a lazy manner. According to Indian custom, at that time all of the women were employed, the men had very little employment. I would like to go to the Earth Country, where men laze their time away, Spider-Man thought to himself. I would get married to 4 women, who would work for me, while I took life easy, since I needed a rest. He was really tired out from his work, because he was constantly weaving and spinning webs day and night. But, when he requested a break, he was not permitted to stop. Instead, he received a kick to ease his discomfort, and was referred to as sleepy head, lazy bones, and other derogatory names, while being instructed to put in more effort in work. He became angry at this point, and decided to exact revenge on the star people for having him working so hard. He thought that, if he punished them and gave them trouble, they would be happy to have him gone. So he came up with a cunning plan. Each night, when a star fairy neared to the top of the ladder to travel back to the Sky Country, Spider-Man would cut the threads, and the fairy would fall into the earth with a great crash. He continued doing this night after night, chuckling to himself as he watched the sky fairies sprawl through the air and kick their heels, while the earth people gazed up in wonder and referred to them as shooting stars. Because of the Spider-Man's manipulations, many star people to fall to earth in this way, and because of their broken limbs or disfigured faces, they were unable to return to the Sky Country. Besides, in the Sky Country, every person must have lovely faces and shapes. However, Spider-Man's this methods brought him no good. He was kept busy at his chores constantly, since the star people would not drive him away, because they required Spider-Man's webs. Finally, he made the decision to leave on his own accord. One night, when the sun was asleep and the moon and stars had gone to work, he bid the Sky Kingdom farewell and dropped down himself to the earth, using one of his own strands of yarn while spinning it. He married 4 wives in the Earth Country, as he had planned, because he wanted them to labor for him, while he kept himself relaxed from work. He thought he had put in enough time at work. For a while, everything went according to his plan, and Spider-Man was satisfied to lead a sluggish life. He did not spin or weave even a single thread. On the earth, no men were working, only the women were employed. However, Glooskap, the ruler of the earth at that time, became exceedingly angry, because the men in this area were so slothful. So one day, the ruler sent famine into their country, as retribution for their sins. Famine entered the area covertly, gathered up all the corn, and took it away. He then called to him all the creatures, birds, and fish in the sea and rivers, and he took them with him. There was nothing left to eat across the entire country. Only water was left. They were starving to death, and spent days subsisting just on water. They sometimes drank cold water, sometimes hot water, sometimes lukewarm water, but at best it was subpar food. The Spider-Man quickly grew tired of this unusual diet, because it did not satisfy his need to only drink water. He grew enormously in size as a result of it, yet it didn't provide him with any nourishment or energy. In light of this, he thought, there must be good food someplace in the world, I will go and seek it out. At night, when everyone was asleep, he took a sizable bag that night, crept silently away from his 4 wives, and headed out on his quest for food. He did not want anyone to know where he was going. He traveled for several days while struggling to survive solely on water, but he was unable to find any food, and the sack he was carrying was still empty. Finally one day he noticed birds in the trees and realized that he was getting close to the hunger borderlands. That night in the forest, when he paused at a creek to drink, he spotted a little glint of light far ahead of him through the trees. He quickly moved in the direction of the light, and soon he saw a man with a large hump on his shoulders, scars all over his face, and a light hanging behind him with a shade, which he could open and close at his wish. The Spider-Man said to the man, I'm looking for food, tell me where I may find it. Do you want it for your people? The light-wielding man with the hump asked. The Spider-Man, however, replied, no, I want it only for me. When the border of the land of plenty was within reach, then the humped man laughed and said, follow me, and I'll give you food. Then he hurriedly ran through the trees, flashing the light at his back, and flickering the light by opening and closing the shade. The Spider-Man followed the flashing light, in the pitch blackness, but he had to go so quickly that, by the time he arrived to the house, where the humped man had stopped, he was nearly out of breath. However, the humped man did not laugh, until he saw Spider-Man approaching with his chubby and bloated belly, and puffing wearily. Then the humped man offered Spider-Man a hearty supper after a lengthy fast, and the Spider-Man soon felt better. Then the humped man said, you are the Spider-Man who once wove webs in the sky, right? He also said to the Spider-Man, I once lived in the star country as well, and one dark night, as I was returning from the earth country on your ladder, with my lamp on my back to light the path, you cut the threads of the web, when I was getting close to the sky, and I fell to the ground with a loud crash. That is why I have a large hump on my back, and facial scars, and as a consequence, I have never been permitted to return to the sky country of the stars. Because I still possess my former ability, and still carry my lamp starlight from the sky country at my back. I still wander the earth at night, as a forest fairy, just as I did in the past. While I still have life, I will never return to the star country. But someday, when my task on earth is done, I shall go back. However, even if you treated me badly, I will feed you. The Spider-Man smiled to himself, as he recalled the evenings, when he had cut the ladder threads, and heard the sound of the star fairies crashing to the earth. However, the man with the light was aware that this was his time to exact revenge on Spider-Man. But this time, he did not suspect evil. The Spider-Man was happy to finally get food. The humped man said to the Spider-Man, I will give you 4 pots. Before you go home, you must wait to open them. When you open them after that, they will always be packed with wholesome food. They will then be loaded with food. And food supply would not ever decrease. The Spider-Man put the 4 pots in his bag, and, feeling happy over his achievement, started out for his house, while slinging the bag over his shoulder. After Spider-Man had left, the humped man used his power to try make him hungry. Nevertheless, while almost hungry, he continued traveling for several days without breaking open the pots, because he wanted to follow the humped man's advice. At last he could not wait no longer. He pulled the pots out of the bag when he arrived close to his house. They were filled with good food, as the humped man had been promised to him. A delicious pork stew, numerous cooked veggies, bread baked from Indian corn, and beautiful ripe fruit were all included in separate containers. He ate food until his limit. He covered the pots, and reinserted them into the bag, and hid the bag among the trees. He then returned home. In the meantime, he had developed sympathy for his people, and he made the decision to invite the chief and the entire tribe to a feast the following evening, because the pots would be full, the food would never run out, and there would be enough for everyone. If he could feed everyone during their hunger, he believed that the people would regard him as a wonderful man. He then went home. His wife welcomed him back into the house with open arms, and immediately brought him water, the only food they had. But he laughed them to scorn, and threw the water in their faces, and said, "Oh, foolish women, I do not want water. It is not food for a great man like me. I have had a good meal of meat stew, corn bread, and cooked vegetables, and luscious ripe fruit. I am the only one who knows where there is a lot of food. When all else fails, I can still get food, because I am a great man. Go forth and invite the chief and the entire populace to a feast that I will provide for them tomorrow night. It will be a feast for the entire country, because my food never runs out." When his wives heard his story, they were all amazed, and the memory of his delicious lunch just made them more hungry. But as he had instructed them, they went outside and invited the entire tribe to a feast. The following night, the feast was attended by everyone, because the news of it had spread every corner of the country. Since they wanted to eat well and were quite hungry, they had not taken any water that day. They were as hungry as wild beasts in search of food. The Spider-Man proudly brought in his bag of pots, after being praised by the crowd, which made him extremely happy. Everyone waited impatiently and with hunger. But, when he opened the first pot, there was no food within it. The same thing happened when he opened the second pot, and when he uncovered all the pots, there was not a bit of food in any of them. Each had a large gaping hole in the bottom, and were all empty. Now, this is how everything had played out. When the Star Fairy, a humped man, gave the Spider-Man the pots, he was well aware that the Spider-Man would disobey his orders and open the pots before he reached to his house. He smiled to himself, because he knew he could now exact revenge on the web weaver who had wounded him. As a result, once the Spider-Man placed the pots among the trees, the humped man used his magic to make holes in the pots, breaking the food's charm and making all of the food disappear. The people believed that they had been intentionally deceived when they discovered the empty pots. The pots were still covered with food scraps and the aroma of stew and fruit. They believed that Spider-Man had eaten the entire meal by himself. So, the people attacked the Spider-Man in their tremendous hunger, wrath, and disappointment, beat him and carried him to the ground. While the humped man, with the lamp at his back, was hiding behind the trees, watched them and laughed with joy. Then the people cut off the Spider-Man's arms to the shoulders and his legs to the thighs, so that he had 8 limbs instead of 4. Then the humped man, a star fairy by the name of Firefly, emerged from the shadows of the trees, and approaching the lying Spider-Man, he said the following: "From now on, as punishment for your cruelty to the Star People, you will always crawl on 8 legs, have a fat round belly, because of the water you have consumed, and sometimes you will live on top of the water. But you will only allowed to eat insects and flies. You will frequently try to return to the Star Country, but you will always slide back down on the strand of yarn that you have spun. And you will also always spin downwardly, but never upwards." Then Firefly quickly disappeared, after flashing his light flitting through the trees, while he opened and shut the lamp's shade. And because of the cruelty that the Spider-Man practiced on the Star Fairies in the past, he still lives today in the manner that the humped man of the lamp had predicted.